Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm late. It was difficult to get from Manhattan to here, surprisingly. I apologize.
Not to all of us.
I apologize for my dog. We've been apart for almost a month, and we were reunited a couple of days ago, and we're still in that honeymoon phase. So give it time. And thank you, Wendy, so much for being here with me.
It's such a pleasure to be able to be here with you celebrating End of Story. We've met on many occasions at different signings for other authors and book festivals, but this is the first official interview, so this is such a treat for me. And wow, okay, I want you to give just the setup for this story with no spoilers, and then, of course, I have lots of questions for you.
So End of Story, in 3 or 4 sentences, is the story of Sebastian Trapp, who is a legendary crime novelist made rich over many decades by his publication of many stories in the Arthur Conan Doyle vein. And prior to the action of the novel, Sebastian has been corresponding for about 5 years with a young woman in New York City named Nicky Hunter. She's an expert in crime fiction. She teaches creative writing classes at a college. And Sebastian has most recently written to her to say, look, bad luck. I'm 70 years old and I'm dying. I've got kidney failure. I'm dead in 3 months. So I would like for you, as my faithful correspondent and as a writer yourself, to trek out here to San Francisco to shack up with me in my lavish Pacific Heights mansion with my second wife and my grown daughter, and to help me write my life story. And Nicky accepts this somewhat curious commission, in part because she genuinely does love Sebastian Trapp's work, and in part because she's fascinated by the central mystery in the man's own life. 20 years ago, on New Year's Eve 1999, his first wife and teenage son vanished from separate points in San Francisco without a trace, never heard from again. And as Nicky meets the man and begins to interview those in his circle, a game of cat and mouse unfolds between them, and she starts to suspect that someone in his circle, perhaps the man himself, knows much more than what they've said about what really happened that night.
Yes, all of that and more. Oh my goodness. So I want to back up a little bit, and just as a writer myself,
yes.
What is the origin of this story? So you wrote The Woman in the Window, mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know, like, you turn in a manuscript, it takes at least a year for it to come out. And during that time, your publisher is usually like, where's the next one? Or what's the next idea? So I'm very curious if you started thinking about this book, if you did, whether that changed after the wild success of The Woman in the Window, and how that success influenced this story. Like, give me the whole origin of End of Story.
So the quick answer, the shortest description of its provenance, is that on September 1st or early September 2016, before The Woman in the Window was submitted to publishers, a couple of weeks before that submission, I was reading an article in the New York Times about a so-called personal biographer. And this was a memoirist for hire whom you could recruit and commission to write the life and times of yourself or your marriage or what have you. And I wondered, not judgmentally, but I wondered, gosh, who would want someone poking around in their family life like that? And who would want to entrust their legacy to someone else's interpretation to any extent? And as I worked in publishing for 10 years, I thought, if The Woman in the Window were to be acquired, it wouldn't help to have another one in the chamber. The Woman in the Window was acquired, and it was published in early 2018, and I was extremely fortunate in that it was published as successfully as it was. The American publishers were my own employers of 5 years by that point, and it's a real, at the risk of sounding immodest, I'm really proud of the fact that my own employers tolerated me enough to spend money on me like that.
Yes.
That made for a good performance evaluation that year. And I kept very busy touring to promote that book. Currently, publishers are not touring authors much because of COVID. The problem for authors who like touring, is that book sales boomed during COVID. People had little else to do. So publishers concluded rightly, that maybe touring was something of an unnecessary extravagance if they could enjoy these booming sales without actually trotting their authors out. But back then, in 2018, I was touring all the time. I saw something like 16 or 17 countries over the course of a year, and a lot of cities in North America. And I'm not complaining, it was extraordinary, but I was also really tired. And as I began hearing from people on the road, I noticed that what they seemed to be responding to the degree they did respond to The Woman in the Window, was not so much its mystery, which I think is fine. I think it's a fine mystery, but what they described as its emotional intensity, or its poignancy. And having read a lot of thrillers, having published a lot of thrillers, I can certainly attest to what I find memorable in them, and it is actually what I find memorable in your books. There is an emotional resonance and dimension to it. And so I decided that this next book should probably lean into that a bit more. And that's why this book is, if you ask me, fairly significantly more layered and emotionally involving, I hope it is, than the first one.
It's extremely layered, and when I started reading it, having read and loved The Woman in the Window, and I think I read that maybe after my first thriller came out, and it, you know, as writers, we all have like writer's envy, and I'm like, oh, damn, that twist, you know, and then you aspire like, oh, okay. And I think when I read that, I was writing my third novel, and I was at my son's swim meet in, I don't know, upstate, like up in New Hampshire or something. And when I read the twist in The Woman in the Window, the first twist, I was like, all right, I need another twist. I need another twist. Like, this is so good. I can't, like, and I actually then layered in another twist because of your book. So it inspired me. Yeah.
If I can jump in, though. So I was talking to someone recently about how it's sort of a point of frustration to me that publishers lay so much emphasis, undue, I believe,
Yes.
on the twist. And if you
Yes.
peruse metadata, sort of the subtitles on Amazon, you'll see that publishers are stacking their titles with Book X, the shockingest twist you'll read this year. That's not even a word.
I know.
And
Yes.
and reading those, I feel this pressure to
Yes.
compete. And something that I find helpful is to remind myself of one book in particular. One of my favorite books of recent years is, does anyone read Tana French?
Yes.
Yeah, I love Tana French. And her debut novel is called In the Woods. And it's sort of a double mystery, but the central mystery concerns the killing of a young girl. And I am terrible at working out whodunit. I'm really, really bad. Like Murder, She Wrote, I'm just like... But I did guess this one very quickly, and it didn't matter at all.
Yeah.
I love the book. It is gorgeously written. It is so evocative. It is heart-stopping. It does not matter to me that either there isn't a twist or that I anticipated the twist. And so I do think that for my next book, I might quit trying to top myself.
Yeah, and the thing about the twist in The Woman in the Window is that it was emotionally based. It was emotionally grounded, and that's what made it so. It wasn't tricky. It was just like, oh, it just, you know, it killed my soul in a good way, in a little
You're
bit,
welcome.
to be reborn, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, like, so let's get back though to end of story. So talking about the genre and writing this book, and I love this. There's a quote that's in chapter 76, where Sebastian Trapp says to Nicky, "You're not in a traditional mystery. You're in a psychological thriller." And when I first started reading this, I was like, "Oh, damn! A.J. Finn has written like an Agatha Christie novel. Like, this is a proper traditional murder mystery." And it's such a treat because every chapter has a sort of a quote from a wonderful traditional mystery. It's an homage to Agatha Christie and to that genre, and the writing style is sort of honors that genre. And so I wanted to ask, like, when you were writing this, did you feel like it was a bold move to change? I mean, it's still a psychological thriller. It's still an incredibly layered mystery, but it's written in really the vein of these amazing traditional whodunits, if that's the right terminology. Were you aware of that when you were writing? Did you feel like you were making a bold move? Was it just what served the story? I'm just curious how you, when you sat down to write it and thought about how you were going to write this story, how it came to be.
I do love a Golden Age detective story, and for those not au fait with the term, Golden Age refers to like 1890 to maybe 1930, and it encompasses authors like Conan Doyle, like Christie, like Dorothy Sayers, like Niall Marsh, like Edmund Crispin, like Josephine Tay. Most of the best ones are women, actually. And I love them. I read them as kids. I grew up to publish the Agatha Christie estate. In my job in American publishing, I was the publisher of her backlist, her extensive backlist. And so I had the opportunity to reread a lot of them. And this exposed for me what I would describe as, if not a limitation, okay, a limitation. If not a limitation, then an aspect of them, which is that while she in particular is terrifically good at gamesmanship. Like, I could never, ever compete with her at her best or even her not so best. She does not appear particularly interested in character. I don't really recall any of her characters, apart from Poirot and Miss Marple, who are really more collections of tics, endearing tics. And I return to these books because of the assurance that Poirot will not change. I do not want to see him, get a girl or get a man or whatever he might get. What I like about psychological thrillers is that there is much more latitude, I would say, and much more room to explore. Watching Knives Out in 2019, 3 years after I began this book, just for the record, I thought, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was very brisk, it was very funny, it was terrifically nimble and clever. It didn't really engage me emotionally at all.
Agreed.
And that is fine. I'm totally happy just to be entertained, and man, that did it marvelously. But I knew pretty early on with this that while I wanted to set the action in the world of Golden Age fiction, I wanted the story ultimately to deepen. And that is why there is that exchange where a character in a very meta maneuver actually says, you are in a psychological thriller.
Yeah, and all of that is in there. The characters and the emotion and the backstory as you start to sort of as the story unfolds and you start to understand more. And it's so hard to talk about without doing spoilers. But let's dive into some of these characters, because that is, like you said, I think there is entertainment for like a whodunit, wanting to solve the mystery. But what keeps me glued to a page is exactly what you said, an emotional attachment to the characters, to the setting, wanting to turn the page and find out what happened, but also wanting to stay on the page and be with the story and not wanting the story to end. And it's very interesting when you read thrillers, right? 'Cause some of them you're just like, just tell me if she lives or dies. And then some of them you're like, I don't care. I just want to stay with this trauma with you and just be there with you. And they're such different books, right? So let's talk about the characters, because that is what keeps you, I think, in this book glued to the pages and wanting to know the mystery, but also wanting to be with these characters. So Sebastian Trapp, he is, well, you talk about him a little bit. I thought he was so layered. His sort of obsession with death, and now he's dying. And there's this great mystery out there about his son and his first wife. And it is a cat and mouse game. How did you, where did he come from, and how did you develop him?
I knew I wanted the story to concern a writer. He is not, I suppose he's the central character in the story in the way, like, the sun is the center of the universe. I guess the sun is inarguably the center. Well, our solar system, rather. My point is, he does not have the most page time, or whatever the equivalent of screen time would be. I don't think he's even top 3. But all the characters orbit him. I knew I wanted a crime writer because this person had to have a profession in which I was somewhat conversant, and I don't know about anything else, really. It's sort of embarrassing. Very ignorant. I wanted him to be someone who was fun. And I have not seen Succession. A couple of people have suggested he might be not dissimilar to that character. My impression of that show is that everyone is really nasty to one another. I don't think, it's actually quite a warm household in this book. But what I like about this character is that there's sort of a glint in his eye. He's capable of mocking himself. He's capable of self-parody. He dresses in a sort of affected, what was his name, Tom Wolfe or George Plimpton manner. And he enjoys busting out big words he probably can't define precisely. I do the exact same thing. But he has what one character describes as a voltage to him, kind of a dark voltage. So you never know quite where you stand, or if in fact he might have killed his first wife and son.
Yeah, and that is what's so entertaining really about him, is that he's a little whimsical and aloof, and he has these like one-liners, and yet he is possibly holding the secret to this mystery. And he actually even says to Nicky at one point, "You and I might solve an old mystery or two." So you're like, just tell us already. But then it's so much fun to be with him on the page with all of these, as you said, these characters who are circling this orbit. And so let's talk about Nicky Hunter. And actually, let me back up. When you got this idea about the ghostwriter, so where did it start with Sebastian, or did it start with Nicky? Which character was the first to sort of come to be?
Well, it was 7.5 years ago.
Come on, you can really remember.
Shut up. There was
Ike agrees with me.
Yeah, she does. She's on board. Fair enough. Probably, maybe together. I knew that I wanted someone investigating someone else. So who would those people be? One would be a crime writer, because that's a profession to which I can speak to an extent. And the other, I decided, I'm going to put her outside in a second. I am.
Nobody light a match.
Yeah, please. And the other, Nicky, was very difficult. And I generally don't like it when authors take me too far behind the curtain, but she remained stubbornly colorless for most of the writing process for years.
Yeah.
And have you had that experience with a lead character?
Not.
All right, fine, Wendy.
No, but you know what? Yes, a character that, again, I don't want to have any spoilers, but a character where I'm not sure how much to reveal.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do I flesh out this character without revealing too much and having them also be the primary point of view in the story?
Well put.
Which is the challenge, when they are the point of view, and that's what's so clever about it. And just to point out, this is going to geek out on writing a little bit, but you wrote in, the one in the window was I think it was in first person, right?
Yes.
And I just want to say, like, the agility with which you have written these points of view of these characters in such different styles, and with such one so close, so in the head, and the other so elusive, so interesting but a little evasive. We never get too close to Nicky. Oh wait, she has a dog. Like, every reveal, I'm like, she has a dog and a former boyfriend. Thank you for that nugget of information. But Woman in the Window, we knew everything. Yeah. I knew everything she was doing and drinking every drop of wine. And I was saying earlier, it's like watching your favorite actor who's just so brilliant in totally different roles, and the skill that you brought to both of these books is amazing, because they are so different and yet written really in a similar, with the point of view of this character, but so different.
Well, honestly, thank you. That is outstandingly high praise, both coming from you and I will accept that, because it was by far the most difficult part of this book. The first book was first person, and first person is pretty easy, frankly. It's like writing a diary entry, if you will. You have immediate access to this person's every thought, sensation. It is possible to withhold details, but it's not difficult, really.
Yeah.
Third person there's an intimacy there, but it's limited.
You have
isn't
degrees
it?
of closeness. So
Degrees,
you can go
yeah.
third person that's almost like first person.
Yes.
And then you can do third person here, which is a little removed, right?
A little removed, but
that's hard.
You want their voice, you want their sense of humor, or yes. So thank you for that very much.
Yeah, and I was very impressed with that because you wanted to be with her, but still felt like you didn't. It was like, wait, I don't know much about this character.
Yep.
Really great. And then there's a whole cast of characters. Of course, there's the missing son, Cole, and then the missing wife, Hope, and the second wife, Diana, who was Hope's assistant, the nephew, Freddy, and then his daughter, Madeleine, who is grown but living with him and in this estate. And how did you, first of all, are you a plotter or a pantser?
Oh, I'm a plotter. What
Yes!
are you? Yeah. Oh,
Yes! Sorry.
Do you want to explain?
So people who write all books, but especially thrillers, we call ourselves either plotters or pantsers. Pantsers, are people who fly by the seat of their pants. They just start writing, and somehow they come up with these I don't understand. I do not understand because I am a plotter.
I don't get how they.
I don't get it. Yes.
You need to know where you're going to end
You
up.
need to, yes.
This is the first time I've ever done this in front of an audience.
That's okay. We're all friends here. Okay, there we go. She misses you. So yes, and
I have to plot.
so do I. And I think we're in the minority.
Are we? Is that?
We are.
Oh.
I've started plotting.
This is Lynn Constantine, who's a best-selling
Sound
author,
like you're
by the
talking
way.
about a drug. I just started it.
She's dipped her toe into plotting. But no, we are definitely, I always ask this question, and we are in the minority. But this book had to be plotted out pretty carefully.
Quite
right?
extensively. I wrote an outline, and it was about 27,000 words, which is quite long. The finished book is about 109. I just have to know where I'm going, and I've heard quite a few authors talk about how they like their characters to surprise them. And like if my characters start surprising me, then my medication isn't working. I do not wish to be surprised by my characters.
No, I completely
Do you get
agree.
that?
Yes, and then yes, they do not. Yes,
Yep.
I totally agree. So, plotter. But okay, so when you were plotting this, did the characters? Did you kind of know these characters were going to be in it and you plotted for them, or did you have the plot and then devise the characters? Sorry if that's too technical, everyone. I'm just curious.
No, I'm interested to hear what I have to say, actually. So The Woman in the Window, as you know, was essentially a one-woman show.
Yeah.
There was this one character who was narrating the story in the first person, and there was a small host of supporting characters, but tellingly in the film, no one else had more than a couple of scenes.
Yeah.
It was all Anna Fox. And I didn't wish to do that again. I wanted to write a book in which people actually set foot outside, and I wanted to spend time watching other people aside from the lead. That said, I know, having read quite a lot of Golden Age mysteries in particular, that sometimes these supporting casts can be overstuffed.
Yeah.
Too many suspects. And so I decided, right, I think I'm not speaking for most, but me, I can keep track of about 8 major characters. And so I decided to people the cast accordingly. I knew who was absolutely necessary, and that left room for a certain number of suspects. A trick I use, although I messed up with one character in this book, but a trick I use is to give each character a name that begins with a different letter of the alphabet, because sometimes I find myself reading D and I'll mix up David and Donald or what have you. And I wish I had more authoritative or interesting comments on my process, such as it is, but it just sort of happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I love that you limited the cast of characters so that we could really get to know them. And that's where you kind of shift from the whodunit into the psychological thriller, because that's where it's not just, this character and a clue, this character and a clue. It's this character and a little unpeeling of the layers, right? Another reveal of this same character, another reveal, getting deeper into the psychology of the characters and what might be motivating them. So they were not tropes, and they were not, just sort of carefully planted red herrings. They were actually really substantive characters, and it all made sense at the end.
I would add, too, that, and I'm not saying whether this book does or does not fall into this category, but I'm always intrigued by novels, crime novels, in which ultimately no one is really a bad guy, per se. It's I think, not easy, but convenient, I suppose, to write a novel in which the killer is like, the serial killer cannibal. There's no moral equivocation there. And that can be quite satisfying to read. But I'm also intrigued by stories where, gosh, it's just sort of tragic.
Yeah, like moral ambiguity, right? So
yes.
and a lot of books will have the person who's murdered have done something wrong or be a bad person, right? Just so you don't have to not like the person who killed them.
Yes.
Yes. But it's okay because that person was really morally compromised and had done other bad things to to people, and so you can walk away feeling nothing, maybe just mildly entertained, instead of like, oh my gosh, wow, like good people can do bad things, or good people can be misguided and have a profound psychological impact on loved ones without meaning to.
Well said. Yep.
Right? Just by having their own ideals and their own beliefs and their own history. And so, that's what I loved the layering, the psychological layering. Okay, before we open up to questions, from you, I need my questions answered first. So, what about this whole process? So you worked in publishing for years.
Yep.
And now you've been a writer for years. What do you like? You've seen both sides. What do you like most about being a writer? What are you, like an introvert who loves that time when you're just sitting there in the book, in the process, or is that torment? And do you love being on the road? Do you love interfacing with people? What have you loved the most about being on the other side of this business?
I really like meeting readers, and that's not just sycophancy here. Readers, I think, are the best people, not least because there is so much competing for their attention, and so much of it is free, too. And yet they choose to spend money, or at least time, certainly, 12 hours, 15 hours, on a book. Yeah. I'm profoundly grateful for that. I think they're my bosses, basically. I like meeting other writers. This book took me 7 years to write. I first thought of it in September 2016, as I said, and it was published February 2024, so 7.5. And I'd been wondering how to answer questions about, why did it take you so long to write? Because my first book only took me a year. And I promise this is going somewhere, but so when I was promoting The Woman in the Window, I talked about how I began writing this book the same week, basically, that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which was July 21st, 2015, excuse me. And that was obviously a life-changing diagnosis for me, and a not unwelcome one, because for 14 years prior to that, I'd struggled with what had been diagnosed as depression in 2001. And I had taken assorted antidepressants as monotherapy. That was all I took, and that is, it turns out, the worst way to treat bipolar disorder. So I spent a couple weeks after this diagnosis on my 36th birthday adjusting to my new medication, lithium and lamotrigine, and I found myself feeling quite angry, and I'm not an angry person. I've got plenty of defects. I'm not angry. I felt angry because I thought, well, okay, through no one's fault, it is very, very routinely misdiagnosed, bipolar disorder. I had still not forfeited 14 years of my life, but I'd gone improperly medicated for 14 years. And that upset me. And so I put some of that upset into the story of a woman who was herself grappling with a different kind of grief. And then around the time my tour wound down, a few years later, I got a dog. I regret that decision sometimes, but here she is. And the following year, which is when I really should have been kicking this new book into overdrive, I became very depressed again. And again, when I was preparing for this tour, I thought, okay, what's a cute, glib answer I can offer? Because I noticed that in the profiles of me in the international press, they said things like, and if this sounds immodest, it sounds immodest, but they said things like, oh, charming or witty, incredibly handsome. Why are you laughing? But no, you see what I mean, charming or witty. And I recognized that I do have this propensity for offering, sort of glib or entertaining answers, but I got very, very depressed, and it persisted for years, as it sometimes does. And this is what helped me finish the book. A while back, early last year, I want to say, when the book was really stuck, I underwent a treatment that I'd done before in 2011 and 2012 called ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, which is shock therapy. And it's really highly stigmatized because people have seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or Shutter Island. And as I said, I'd done it twice before, and the first time was 10 sessions, and the second time was 8 sessions. And I wasn't sure I'd noticed a measurable improvement either time. This time, it really did work. And after an initial battery of twice weekly ECT for 8 weeks, we decelerated, and so I know that since May I've had it 30 times, and I have it on Friday. And I say all this for 2 reasons. One, I find actually that every single time I attend an event like this, and I'm very grateful to attend events like these, I talk about this to some degree, and afterwards at least one person says to me, I appreciated hearing you, sorry, this sounds like I'm making a saint of myself, but I appreciated hearing you say that because I struggle with an issue or someone I care about struggles with an issue. And I don't really actually feel remotely self-conscious about it at all. And I can recall a couple instances in which members of the press have tried to, shame me for it. And at this point, I'm just like, oh, fuck off. So that is the reason this book has taken a while. I know that was not your direct question, Wendy. But it sort of ties into what my answer to your question would be, which is that the worst part I find of writing is the loneliness. I find it very lonely. I'm single. I imagine that bipolar writer with a dog is single. I'm single, and I am an introvert, like many of us, and yet I find I'm never quite as introverted as I think. Like, I would love it if someone called me. And then my mother calls me, and I'm like, nope, but
Doesn't quite hit the spot.
Nope, there's a loophole there, there's an exception. So it's, the loneliness is tough. And my favorite thing about the writing process, on the other hand, is, and this might be specific to thriller plotting, or it might be just general narrative work, but I love that feeling when two pieces of the puzzle click into place. It's almost audible. It's very much like assembling a jigsaw. I mean, you must enjoy that, right?
Very much.
It is uniquely satisfying.
Yeah, it is, and it is very true. And I'm also single and empty nested, and I say recently, but it's been over a year and change. And yeah, I mean, I have days where I'm so engrossed in the writing, and it's so satisfying. The pieces click into place, and then I look up, and I'm like, okay, I need somebody here now, because now I'm done being introverted, and I need someone here to entertain me and pull me out, and then there's nobody there. But then, of course, if you surround yourself with people, you can't go into that space and where the pieces click. And they really, for me, they only click when I am really isolated and alone, and my brain has nothing to think about except the plot, and that's when it'll come out. But it's true, it's a little bit all or nothing, right? And it's okay, so I have one last question in case somebody forgets to ask it, but I want to know, I've had things optioned, nothing has been made, and you had, this amazing film made of The Woman in the Window, and I just want to know how much freaking fun it was to be involved in that and see it on the big screen, and I know everybody else wants to know that too.
I mean, it wasn't actually that. It was so much fun.
Right, I knew it.
It was quite a sui generis process, that actually, because I might have told you this, I might not have. The studio, which was Fox at the time, bought the book before we'd actually sold the publishing rights. They'd heard about this manuscript, and I remember I was in Palm Springs on holiday when the submission was kicking off, and we hadn't actually accepted any bids from publishers, but by the time I got to LAX, my agent was on the phone with me saying, okay, well, stay tuned for some news on the film front. So I go to the terminal, and it's almost empty. And my agent rings, and she says, well, I've got an exploding offer for you. And I said, that sounds like MacGyver. What is the exploding offer? And she said, it means I've got Fox on the other line. I'm going to tell you what their offer is. And if you say yes, we go with them. If you say no, it goes away forever. And I was quite, anxious about this. She said, do you want the offer? I said, yes, what is it? She said, it's $1 million. What do you think? So I know. I put her on hold. No, I said, yes, I want that, thank you. And so she hung up, and it's like when you step away from the computer. I wanted to tell someone, but there was no one in the terminal, as I said, except for this really lovely Japanese family. There was there was this young father and a young mother and a young child, and I hadn't heard them speak English, and I don't speak Japanese, but still, I turned to them, and I gave them a double thumbs up. And Wendy, bless them, every single one, including the kid, did the same thing back to me. I know, they never call, they never write, but it was a really sweet moment. And I was not a screenwriter, I wasn't even executive producer. Fox were very nice to me. The only significant input I offered, I think, was the casting. I said I want Amy Adams, just because I think she's a magnificent actress. But also, while Amy is a very beautiful woman, she's, she looks pretty rough in that film.
Yeah.
I think she'd be a
lot of she was willing to go there and look the part, which was someone who is, severely mentally compromised by trauma.
Yep.
And self-medicating with
self-medicating
Merlot. Merlot?
It was Merlot, well remembered, yes. I will say, after that book came out, I got all these cases or bottles at least, of Merlot from vineyards. I don't drink. I don't drink Merlot, anyway. But, so I did get to visit the set, which was on a soundstage in Brooklyn 3 times, and I remember the first day, Amy Adams picked up the phone for a scene, and she said, hello, this is Anna Fox. And I thought, I made you. I'm your god. And she did the scene, and I thought, great, on to the next one. And the director, Joe Wright, said, oh, let's do it again. And I thought, oh, okay. So she did it again. Great. Joe said, no, one more time. And I thought, they did it 12 times. Yeah. And at lunch, I said to Amy Adams, God, I saw you do that scene 12 times. And very dryly, she says, yeah, I was there. Touche, Amy Adams. And everything had gone pretty swimmingly for the film up to that point, but then around the time they were wrapping production, Disney bought Fox. And I remember feeling sort of nervous because while Disney are a terrific company and they sure can market the hell out of Marvel and Star Wars, I wasn't sure about an R-rated thriller. And it was scheduled for May of 2020. And in March of 2020, the world got distracted, and the movie was yanked from theaters. And selfishly, my first thought was not who will see this movie, but I did think who will ever see this movie. And happily, Netflix heard that Disney had a thriller about a woman who could not leave her house, and they thought, that's our demographic.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Yeah, well, it was a great movie and a great book, and now I have to open it up to questions. So does anyone want to go first? Yeah.
Go finish it.
What are you doing here?
What are you doing? I wish I thought of that.
Oh, yes, I forgot to talk about the character Watson, who is an English bulldog in the book, so.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Oh, sure. So I actually write for Audible separately, so I can answer this. And when I'm writing a novel, I never think about that at all. And I write Audible originals, so they're written just for Audible. And I've started to write some with a lot of scripted scenes that are performed by different, they're not traditional narrated books. They're like a full cast of characters, almost like a radio play. And so when I'm writing for them, it's a completely different process, and I've had to learn a new skill set. And that's how I know that the answer is no, that when I'm writing a novel, I'm writing it to be read. And what's so interesting is I just I was able to participate in the recording of my the last one I wrote for them. And we have like 30 characters, and it's very much like that, multiple takes. Okay, and the director, would be like, pretend you're, blah, 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 this happened, that happened, and then you'd hear all these different takes just in the voice, and the, and there were many, the reason I was on these calls or these Zooms is that there were many times when what I had written was not working in the performance of the piece. And I would say, you know what, that's too many S's in a row to say, not to read, or that sentence is too long, it's the actors keep stumbling over them. And so I would be there and we would just revise the script on the spot. And now I'm doing another one for them, and it's in my mind, even though I can read it aloud, but I'm very cognizant of if someone else were to read this and it didn't come out of their brain, how will it sound? So, but I don't think novelists are write for Audible or for audio unless they are specifically doing that. But
Yeah, that's a much more interesting answer than mine, which is, no, I don't.
no, he doesn't. See, there you go. Sorry.
But it's a really good question. I don't listen to it, actually, no.
I don't either.
Do you know?
Isn't it so hard? It's weird, right?
Do you know, not to listen?
No, it's weird to listen.
Oh, yeah, I don't, I've tried, and it's not for, it's not that I think they're anything less than really stellar. The snippets I heard were terrific, but it's just, it's sort of, I feel about it not unlike the way I felt about the film of The Woman in the Window, which I happen to really like, but ultimately, and this might sound a bit transactional, it's not my project, really. Yeah. Like, they can do what they want with it, fair enough.
And I think that sometimes the way that the performers will read a passage is not how I hear it in my head, and it freaks me out. So I guess the question is, do you ever have it in your mind how this would play either as a series or a film? And is that ever in your mind when you're writing?
A good question. I knew writing this book that it would be, if it's anything, it's a streaming proposition. There's just too much plot for it to be a film.
Probably a series, like a limited series, yeah.
Yep. I do know, having just had a conversation with my film agent at CAA today at noon, that the limited series is currently somewhat endangered. What studios and streamers are, streamers and studios are in a terrible financial state post-strike because the writers were not producing content that could be monetized during that strike, which is why these streamers and studios are canceling all sorts of projects that never even got off the ground, but for which they'd already paid handsomely. What they are most interested in right now, this is just a bit of unnecessary background info, is cops, lawyers, and doctors. Series.
Ongoing series, yeah.
Ongoing series, because that's where the real money can be made. Yeah. But no, I guess when I conceived this project, I didn't have a particular format in mind. Do you, when you're writing a book, think?
No, I don't. I never. But then it's interesting to me when I give it to my agents who are also at CAA, and they always, they're like this. It's a series.
Yeah,
it's a film. Like, oh, okay.
Just like that.
Yeah,
Yep.
just like that. But yeah, I've heard the same thing, that limited series are in danger, and every one of my projects that is under option for a series, they're trying to figure out how to make it an ongoing series.
Yeah,
for
that's
multiple
what I heard
seasons.
Today. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, and I love limited series too, but they're just.
I think it'll come back.
Yeah.
To be honest, these trends tend to be highly cyclical. So I bet a year from now, we'll be seeing lots of them.
Yeah.
But I agree with you.
Don't look at me. You pick this one.
Again, this one took me 7 years, so I was like, bye, guys. Go with
Don't
God.
let the door hit you.
Seriously. I have not, that said, I have not thought of a third project, and it is sort of, it's exciting thinking, I'll maybe get to meet some new people, if that doesn't sound too precious. I will say the one character, there are several characters in this book I do miss spending a bit of time with. The one I miss possibly the most is the French Bulldog. And just a quick anecdote, there is a French Bulldog in this book. I wanted a bulldog or a dog in my first book, but because the character was an agoraphobe, that wouldn't make sense. She'd have to go outside. So she got a cat for her sins. And in this book, there was a dog. I grew up with real dogs, not this, a real dog, like a lab. We had a lot of labs. But because I live in Manhattan, it had to be this. and I do love her. And so I put her into the book, and her name is Watson. And she's this little Frenchie who just sort of wanders around underfoot. And when I submitted the first draft to my agent, she returned it. It was very long. It was about 191,000 words, so about twice as long as the finished book, I know. And my agent's first somewhat exasperated note was, Dan, I know what the French Bulldog is doing in every chapter of this book. And so I started rereading the book, and to my horror, I saw that I'd written a novel about a French Bulldog that lived in a house where people kept getting murdered. And I do think that's an idea. I do. Like, that is the next great limited series.
That could be a limited series. There you go.
She's a star.
So I think that's it for questions, and everyone, yeah?
I would just like to say I've done quite a lot of interviews over the past month, and it is very, very rare to have an interviewer/moderator as prepared as well as warm and witty, but above all prepared as Wendy. So thank you for that. That was
My pleasure. My pleasure. I love the book, and it was my pleasure, and it's fascinating. And this book is it's amazing. It's so layered, and so many layers in addition to the story, and just all the little, the quotes and about other novels, and your level of knowledge about this genre is so deep, and so I think readers who are familiar with it are going to love that, as a little cherry on top. So everyone should get the book and get it signed and read it and review. Please review on everywhere you can, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming very much.